Oh, well, look. Tripod, you've served me well. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Oh. All right. Well, I don't know. That looks okay. It looks okay. Oh yeah. See, now that's gloomier. Gloomier's good, right? Nobody's here yet. Hi. Hope you can come. Come to the party. Oh my goodness. Scoochie, hoochie woo. There. Ah. Well, hey, good evening. It is I, Douglas Gwilym, your purveyor of the nightly weird. Thanks for joining me. I think we'll hit The House on the Borderland, Part 2. If that sounds all right to you. William Hope Hodgson, 1908. This is Chapter 3, The House in the Arena. And so, after a time, I came to the mountains. Then the course of my journey was altered, and I began to move along their bases, until all at once I saw that I had come opposite to a vast rift, opening into the mountains. Through this I was borne, moving at no great speed. On either side of me, huge scarped walls of rock-like substance rose sheer. Far overhead, I discerned a thin ribbon of red where the mouth of the chasm opened, among inaccessible peaks. Within was gloom, deep and somber, and chilly silence. For a while I went onward steadily, and then at last I saw ahead a deep red glow that told me I was near upon the further opening of the gorge. A minute came and went, and I was at the exit of the chasm, staring out upon an enormous amphitheater of mountains. Yet of the mountains and the terrible grandeur of the place I recked nothing, for I was confounded with amazement to behold, at a distance of several miles and occupying the center of the arena, a stupendous structure built apparently of green jade. Yet in itself it was not the discovery of the building that had so astonished me, but the fact, which became every moment more apparent, that in no particular, save in color and its enormous size, did the lonely structure vary from this house in which I live. For a while I continued to stare fixedly. Even then I could scarcely believe that I saw aright. In my mind a question formed, reiterating incessantly, "What does it mean? What does it mean?" And I was unable to make answer, even out of the depths of my imagination. I seemed capable only of wonder and fear. For a time longer I gazed, noting continually some fresh point of resemblance that attracted me. At last, wearied and sorely puzzled, I turned from it to view the rest of the strange place onto which I had intruded. Hitherto I had been so engrossed in my scrutiny of the house that I had given only a cursory glance round. Now, as I looked, I began to realize upon what sort of place I had come. The arena, for so I have termed it, appeared a perfect circle of about 10 to 12 miles in diameter. The house, as I have mentioned before, standing in the center. The surface of the place, like to that of the plain, had a peculiar misty appearance that was yet not mist. From a rapid survey, my glance passed quickly upwards along the slopes of the circling mountains. How silent they were! I think that the same abominable stillness was more trying to me than anything that I had so far seen or imagined. I was looking up now at the great crags, towering so loftily. Up there, the impalpable redness gave a blurred appearance to everything. And then, as I peered, curiously, a new terror came to me, for away up among the dim peaks to my right, I had descried a vast shape of blackness, giant-like. It grew upon my sight. It had an enormous equine head, with gigantic ears, and seemed to peer steadfastly down into the arena. There was that about the pose that gave me the impression of an eternal watchfulness, of having warded that dismal place through unknown eternities. Slowly, the monster became plainer to me, and then suddenly my gaze sprang from it to something further off and higher among the crags. For a long minute, I gazed fearfully. I was strangely conscious of something not altogether unfamiliar, as though something stirred in the back of my mind. The thing was black, and had 4 grotesque arms. The features showed indistinctly. Round the neck I made out several light-colored objects. Slowly, the details came to me, and I realized coldly that they were skulls. Further down the body was another circling belt, showing less dark against the black trunk. Then, even as I puzzled to know what the thing was, a memory slid into my mind, and straightway I knew that I was looking at a monstrous representation of Kali, the Hindu goddess of death. Other remembrances of my old student days drifted into my thoughts. My glance fell back upon the huge beast-headed thing. Simultaneously, I recognized it for the ancient Egyptian god Set, or Seth, the destroyer of souls. With the knowledge, there came a great sweep of questioning. I stopped and endeavored to think. Things beyond my imagination peered into my frightened mind. I saw, obscurely, the old gods of mythology. I tried to comprehend to what it was all pointing. My gaze dwelt flickeringly between the two, an idea came swiftly, and I turned and glanced rapidly upward, searching the gloomy crags away to my left. Something loomed out under a great peak, a shape of grayness. I wondered I had not seen it earlier, and then remembered I had not yet viewed that portion. I saw it more plainly now. It was, as I have said, gray. It had a tremendous head, but no eyes. That part of its face was blank. Now, I saw that there were other things up among the mountains. Further off, reclining on a lofty edge, I made out a livid mass, irregular and ghoulish. It seemed without form, save for an unclean, half-animal face that looked out vilely from somewhere about its middle. And then I saw others. There were hundreds of them. They seemed to grow out of the shadows. Several I recognized almost immediately as mythological deities. Others were strange to me, utterly strange, beyond the power of a human mind to conceive. On each side, I looked and saw more continually. The mountains were full of strange things, beast gods and horrors so atrocious and bestial that possibility and decency deny any further attempt to describe them. And I was filled with a terrible sense of overwhelming horror, and fear and repugnance. Yet, spite of these, I wondered exceedingly. Was there then, after all, something in the old heathen worship, something more than the mere deifying of men, animals, and elements? The thought gripped me. Was there? Well, if so, it's not here behind my chair, clearly. Later, a question repeated itself. What were they, those beast gods and the others? At first, they had appeared to me just sculptured monsters placed indiscriminately among the inaccessible peaks and precipices of the surrounding mountains. Now, as I scrutinized them with greater intentness, my mind began to reach out to fresh conclusions. There was something about them, an indescribable sort of silent vitality that suggested to my broadening consciousness a state of life in death, a something that was by no means life, as we understand it, but rather an inhuman form of existence that well might be likened to a deathless trance, a condition in which it was possible to imagine their continuing eternally. Immortal, the word rose in my thoughts unbidden, and straightway I grew to wondering whether this might be the immortality of the gods. And then, in the midst of my wondering and musing, something happened. Until then I had been staying just within the shadow of the exit of the great rift. Now, without volition on my own part, I drifted out of the semi-darkness and began to move slowly across the arena toward the house. At this, I gave up all thoughts of those prodigious shapes above me and could only stare frightenedly at the tremendous structure toward which I was being conveyed so remorselessly. Yet, though I searched earnestly, I could discover nothing that I had not already seen, and so became gradually calmer. Presently I had reached a point more than halfway between the house and the gorge. All around was spread the stark loneliness of the place, and the unbroken silence. Steadily I neared the great building. Then all at once something caught my vision, something that came round one of the huge buttresses of the house, and so into full view. It was a gigantic thing, and moved with a curious lope, going almost upright after the manner of a man. It was quite unclothed, and had a remarkable luminous appearance, yet it was the face that attracted and frightened me the most. It was the face of a swine. Silently, intently, I watched this horrible creature, and forgot my fear momentarily in my interest in its movements. It was making its way cumbrously round the building, stopping as it came to each window to peer in and shake at the bars, with which, as in this house, they were protected, and whenever it came to a door, it would push at it, fingering the fastening stealthily. Evidently, it was searching for an ingress into the house. I had come now to within less than a quarter of a mile of the great structure, and still I was compelled forward. Abruptly, the thing turned and gazed hideously in my direction. It opened its mouth, and for the first time the stillness of that abominable place was broken by a deep, booming note that sent an added thrill of apprehension through me. Then immediately I became aware that it was coming toward me, swiftly and silently. In an instant it had covered half the distance that lay between, and still I was borne helplessly to meet it. Only 100 yards, and the brutish ferocity of the giant face numbed me with a feeling of unmitigated horror. I could have screamed, in the supremeness of my fear, and then in the very moment of my extremity and despair, I became conscious that I was looking down upon the arena from a rapidly increasing height. I was rising. In an inconceivably short while, I had reached an altitude of many 100 feet. Beneath me, the spot I had just left was occupied by the foul swine creature. It had gone down on all fours and was snuffling and rooting like a veritable hog at the surface of the arena. A moment, and it rose to its feet, clutching upward with an expression of desire upon its face such as I have never seen in this world. Cheers. Continually I mounted higher. A few minutes, it seemed, and I had risen above the great mountains, floating alone afar in the redness. At a tremendous distance below, the arena showed, dimly, with the mighty house looking no larger than a tiny spot of green. The swine thing was no longer visible. Presently I passed over the mountains, out above the huge breadth of the plain. Far away on its surface, in the direction of the ring-shaped sun, there showed a confused blur. I looked toward it indifferently. It reminded me somewhat of the first glimpse I had caught of the mountain amphitheater. With a sense of weariness, I glanced upward at the immense ring of fire. What a strange thing it was! Then, as I stared, out from the dark center there spurted a sudden flare of extraordinary vivid fire. Compared with the size of the black center, it was as naught, yet in itself stupendous. With awakened interest, I watched it carefully, noting its strange boiling and glowing. Then, in a moment, the whole thing grew dim and unreal, and so passed out of sight. Much amazed, I glanced down to the plain from which I was still rising. Thus I received a fresh surprise. The plain, everything, had vanished, and only a sea of red mist was spread far below me. Gradually, as I stared, this grew remote, and died away into a dim, far mystery of red, against an unfathomable night. A while, and even this had gone, and I was wrapped in an impalpable, lightless gloom. Chapter 4. The Earth. Thus I was, and only the memory that I had lived through the dark once before served to sustain my thoughts. A great time passed, ages, and then a single star broke its way through the darkness. It was the first of one of the outlying clusters of the universe. Presently it was far behind, and all about me shone the splendor of the countless stars. Later, years it seemed, I saw the sun, a clot of flame. Around it I made out presently several remote specks of light, the planets of the solar system. And so I saw the Earth again, blue and unbelievably minute. It grew larger and became defined. A long space of time came and went, and then at last I entered into the shadow of the world, plunging headlong into the dim and holy earth night. Overhead was the old constellations, and there was a crescent moon. Then, as I neared the earth's surface, a dimness swept over me, and I appeared to sink into a black mist. For a while I knew nothing. I was unconscious. Gradually I became aware of a faint, distant whining. It became plainer. A desperate feeling of agony possessed me. I struggled madly for breath and tried to shout. A moment, and I got my breath more easily. I was conscious that something was licking my hand. Something damp swept across my face. I heard a panting, and then again the whining. It seemed to come to my ears now with a sense of familiarity, and I opened my eyes. All was dark, but the feeling of oppression had left me. I was seated, and something was whining piteously and licking me. I felt strangely confused, and instinctively tried to ward off the thing that licked. My head was curiously vacant, and for the moment I seemed incapable of action or thought. Then things came back to me, and I called Pepper, faintly. I was answered by a joyful bark and renewed and frantic caresses. In a little while I felt stronger and put out my hand for the matches. I groped about for a few moments, blindly. Then my hands lit upon them, and I struck a light and looked confusedly around. All about me I saw the old familiar things. And then I sat full of dazed wonders until the flame of the match burnt my fingers and I dropped it, while a hasty expression of pain and anger escaped my lips, surprising me with the sound of my own voice. After a moment I struck another match, and stumbling across the room lit the candles. As I did so, I observed that they had not burned away, but had been put out. As the flames shot up, I turned and stared about the study, yet there was nothing unusual to see. And suddenly a gust of irritation took me. What had happened? I held my head with both hands and tried to remember. Ah, the great silent plain and the ring-shaped sun of red fire. Where were they? Where had I seen them? How long ago? I felt dazed and muddled. Once or twice I walked up and down the room unsteadily. My memory seemed dulled, and already the thing I had witnessed came back to me with an effort. I have a remembrance of cursing peevishly in my bewilderment. Suddenly I turned faint and giddy and had to grasp at the table for support. During a few moments I held on weakly and then managed to totter sideways into a chair. After a little time I felt somewhat better and succeeded in reaching the cupboard where usually I kept brandy and biscuits. I poured myself out a little of the stimulant and drank it off. Then, taking a handful of biscuits, I returned to my chair and began to devour them ravenously. I was vaguely surprised at my hunger. I felt as though I had eaten nothing for an unaccountably long while. As I ate, my glance roved about the room, taking in its various details and still searching, though almost unconsciously, for something tangible upon which to take hold among the invisible mysteries that encompassed me. Surely, I thought, there must be something, and in the same instant my gaze dwelt upon the face of the clock in the opposite corner. Therewith I stopped eating and just stared. For though its ticking indicated most certainly that it was still going, the hands were pointing to a little before the hour of midnight, whereas it was, as well I knew, considerably after that time when I had witnessed the first of the strange happenings I have just described. For perhaps a moment I was astounded and puzzled. Had the hour been the same as when I had last seen the clock, I should have concluded that the hands had stuck in one place, while the internal mechanism went on as usual. But that would in no way account for the hands having traveled backward. Then, even as I turned the matter over in my wearied brain, the thought flashed upon me that it was now close upon the morning of the 22nd, and that I had been unconscious to the visible world through the greater portion of the last 24 hours. The thought occupied my attention for a full minute. Then I commenced to eat again. I was still very hungry. During breakfast next morning, I inquired casually of my sister regarding the date and found my surmise correct. I had indeed been absent, at least in spirit, for nearly a day and a night. My sister asked me no questions, for it is not by any means the first time that I have kept to my study for a whole day, and sometimes a couple of days at a time when I have been particularly engrossed in my books or work. And so the days passed, and I am still filled with a wonder to know the meaning of all that I saw on that memorable night. Yet, well I know that my curiosity is little likely to be satisfied. All right, let's stop there. Next up, Chapter 5, The Thing in the Pit. Please tune in tomorrow night at 10 for your nightly dose of the Proto-Weird. Be well and be kind to one another.